So, let's go back to 2013 for a second.
Oh, wow. Okay. It's setting the time machine.
Right. Well, I mean, you remember the massive retail data breach, right? One of the biggest chains in the
Whoa,
world.
absolutely. I think it was, what, 40 million credit and debit card numbers stolen. Just a massive, massive fallout.
Yeah, exactly. 40 million. And the fallout cost them like hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
The CEO ended up resigning, and honestly, the brand took a reputational beating that lasted for, well, years.
For sure. It's still a case study today.
Exactly. But the truly terrifying part about that whole breach, like the thing that keeps executives up at night, it didn't happen because of some, sophisticated Ocean's 11 style hack into their mainframe.
No, it was way more mundane than that.
Right. It happened because an attacker compromised a third-party vendor. Specifically, I think it was an HVAC company.
Yeah, the air conditioning guys.
Right. An HVAC company that serviced the retailer systems.
Yeah.
And that vendor had remote access to the corporate network for, like, billing and project management.
Just a tiny, seemingly insignificant logistical backdoor left completely wide open.
Exactly. And, it is the ultimate nightmare scenario.
Oh, without a doubt. Because, I mean, if you looked at that retailer's internal IT security audits on paper back then,
Yeah.
they probably looked pristine.
Oh, I bet they had a Wallace certificate.
Right. They were likely perfectly compliant with all their primary internal frameworks. But, a management system doesn't just exist in a vacuum.
No, it bleeds out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It bleeds out into the real world, right? Into supply chains, into third-party vendors, into the physical environment. And if your auditing methodology just stops at the edge of your own immediate organizational chart, well, you aren't actually auditing the system.
No, you're just auditing the illusion of control.
Exactly, the illusion.
Which brings us to the core mission of this deep dive today. If you're listening to this, you likely already spend your life navigating these massive, complex corporate ecosystems.
You're in the trenches.
Right. That just checking boxes on a static spreadsheet is, well, it's no longer sufficient. It just doesn't cut it.
Not even close.
So today, we are acting as your co-instructors for a masterclass on a very specific, highly anticipated piece of documentation. We are unpacking Annex A of the BSEN ISO 19011.2026 standard.
Yes. The 2026 update. And let me just say, it is a paradigm shift. I mean, for years, the industry has recognized that organizations are becoming, way more decentralized.
Oh, heavily decentralized.
Right, and heavily reliant on complex global supply chains, not to mention increasingly governed by digital infrastructure and artificial intelligence.
AI is everywhere now.
Everywhere. And Annex A is the informative guidance for planning and conducting management system audits in this new reality. It's essentially the tactical playbook for how an auditor actually operates out there.
In a landscape where the perimeter of a company is basically non-existent.
Literally non-existent, yes.
So we're going to walk through the mechanics of this annex today, chronologically, right? Tracing the life cycle of an audit from the very moment you begin structuring your evidence-gathering strategy all the way to how you frame and deliver a multi-layered nonconformity.
A to Z.
Exactly. And we have to start at the absolute foundation. Like, before you even request a single document from an auditee, you have to figure out your methodology and, well, your math.
The math is crucial. So Section 8.1 addresses the application of auditing methods. And historically, there's a real tendency to treat an audit as a monolithic event,
Like a one-time show.
Right. You go on site, you sit in a stale conference room, you interview some people, you flip through some physical binders, and then you leave.
Check.
Yeah. But the 2026 standard forces a much more sophisticated composite approach. It demands that you apply a combination of methods.
So we're talking synchronous, asynchronous, remote, on-site.
Animated data scraping, yeah.
Okay.
All of it, to optimize both efficiency and effectiveness.
Okay, but let's talk about the friction there. Because, mixing methods sounds great in a boardroom, right?
Sure, in theory.
But in practice, it requires an immense amount of logistical overhead. Think about it. If I'm auditing a decentralized software development firm, right, and they have a footprint in Berlin, Bangalore, and Austin.
That's a massive footprint.
Right. How do I practically layer those methods without burning through my entire time allocation, just, coordinating Zoom links and access protocols?
Well, you base it entirely on risk and objective. You don't just mix methods for the sake of variety. That's a huge mistake.
Right. It's not a buffet.
Exactly. You use, say, asynchronous review for their static code repositories and compliance documentation. That doesn't need to be live.
Makes sense.
Then you use live synchronous remote interviews for the Scrum Masters, right? To gauge team culture and agile adherence, you do that over video.
Okay.
And you reserve the really expensive, high-friction physical site visit solely for the physical server hardware security in Berlin, assuming that hardware even falls within your scope.
So you're being surgical about it.
Very surgical. The standard is asking auditors to act more like systems architects now, designing a bespoke data gathering mechanism for every single engagement.
Wow. Okay, so you build this custom mechanism, but the data you gather has to actually mean something, right?
That has to hold up.
Which brings us to the mathematical heart of the planning phase. Section 8.6.3, statistical sampling. Now, anyone listening to this deep dive already knows the fundamental difference between attribute-based sampling—
Your binary pass or fail checks.
Right, exactly. And variable-based sampling, where you're looking at a continuous range of outcomes like, I don't know, temperature variations in cold storage.
Or latency rates in a network, yeah.
Yeah. But what absolutely fascinated me about the 2026 text is how heavily it pivots away from human intuition.
A judgment-based sampling is essentially dead in high-stakes environments.
Mary?
Dead. I mean, for good reason. Human beings are terrible at randomness. We're just biologically bad at it.
That's fair.
We inherently look for patterns. We suffer from massive confirmation bias. And we tend to pull samples that are either, easiest to reach or the most visibly flawed.
The one's on the top of the pile.
Exactly. The standard explicitly states that judgment-based sampling provides zero statistical estimate of uncertainty.
Wow.
Zero. None. If you find 0 errors in 20 files that you handpicked, you cannot mathematically prove that the remaining 10,000 files are also error-free.
You're just hoping your gut instinct was representative of the whole system. Like tasting a pot of soup without stirring it first?
That's a perfect analogy, yes. You just skimmed the top. So the shift is strongly toward rigorous probability theory.
Okay.
And in the context of modern variable-based sampling, this is where the 2026 updates get incredibly intense. Because we are no longer just sampling physical invoices in a filing cabinet.
Right.
We're sampling continuous, massive data lakes.
Okay, let's explore the reality of that for a second. Say I'm auditing an automated manufacturing plant, and they're producing medical devices. I have a continuous stream of telemetry data coming off the assembly line. Like, literally every rotation of a robotic arm is logged.
Millions of data points.
Right. I can't sample 100% of it because the processing power required to run the audit analytics would probably crash their entire ERP system.
Oh, absolutely. It would bottleneck the whole operation.
So I have to rely on a variable-based statistical sample. Now, the standard says I need to determine my, quote, acceptable confidence level.
Yes.
How does an auditor negotiate that number when human lives are attached to the product? I mean, medical devices.
That is honestly the most critical conversation you will have during the entire planning phase. Because if you set a 5% sampling risk, you are essentially establishing a 95% confidence level.
Right, the inverse.
Exactly. In plain terms, you are mathematically admitting that 5 times out of 100, the sample you pull might not reflect the actual true population of the data.
Which sounds terrifying.
Well, context matters. When you're making plastic toys, a 5% margin of error is just a standard business calculation.
Sure. A few defective toys, you issue a refund.
Exactly. But when you are making pacemakers, a 5% margin of error is a catastrophic liability.
So the auditor has to force the organization to state on the record what their acceptable margin of error is before the math is even applied.
Yes. The auditor does not unilaterally invent the confidence interval. That's a huge misconception.
Oh, interesting.
They evaluate the context of the organization, the regulatory requirements, and the inherent risk. And then they design the sampling plan to meet the legally or strategically mandated confidence level.
It's a collaborative definition of risk.
Exactly. And then, crucially, you document the absolute life out of it.
Every single detail.
Every detail. The population size, the exact sampling criteria, the statistical parameters you used, the actual algorithm if you're using automated extraction.
Because if something goes wrong...
Right. If there is a product failure 3 years down the line and investigators pull your audit report, your defense isn't, well, I looked at a lot of files.
I checked a bunch of stuff.
Right. That won't hold up in court. Your defense is the mathematical rigor of your probability model.
Man. Okay, so the methodology is built. The probability model is locked. We know our data sample will be mathematically sound.
We have our tools.
Right. Now, where do we aim this machinery? Typically, I think the first major hurdle in any management system is the legal and regulatory baseline,
Usually, yes.
which brings us to section A.7, focusing on auditing compliance within a management system. And I want to clarify a massive misconception here, even among, seasoned professionals.
No, I know exactly what you're going to say.
We are not acting as regulatory inspectors.
No. And blurring that line is incredibly dangerous for an auditor. If you are conducting, say, an environmental management audit, you are not there to dip a beaker into their wastewater outflow and issue a fine if the pH level is off by a fraction.
Right. You're an auditor, not the EPA.
Exactly. The text makes a razor-sharp distinction here. We are auditing their processes for ensuring compliance, not conducting a pure legal compliance audit.
Okay, but how do you actually separate those two in the field? I mean, practically speaking, if I'm walking the floor and I see a glaring legal violation, a puddle of toxic chemicals just sitting there, I can't just ignore it because I'm quote-unquote only auditing the process.
Oh, of course you don't ignore it. But you use it as an input to evaluate the mechanism itself.
Okay, what do you mean?
Think of it like auditing a radar system.
Okay.
If an enemy plane slips through, you don't just shoot down the plane and call it a day. That doesn't fix the radar. You have to figure out why the radar didn't see the plane in the first place.
Right. It's about the systemic failure.
Exactly. So the 2026 standard outlines specific things you must verify. Do they have a robust method for identifying the statutory and regulatory requirements that apply to them?
Right. How do they even know what laws apply?
Yes. And then how do they translate a 500-page piece of dense legislation into actionable tasks for a shift manager on the factory floor?
Which brings up the whole concept of management of change, right? Because the regulatory landscape isn't static. It's constantly shifting.
Very quickly, yes.
Look at the rollout of the EU AI Act or these new global supply chain due diligence laws. A static compliance registry is basically outdated the moment it's printed.
That is exactly what you are testing. When a new regulation passes, what triggers inside this organization?
Who hits the alarm?
Right. Who is competent enough to read the mandate, assess the gap in their current operations, and actually roll out the new requirement?
To make sure it sticks.
Yes. Furthermore, are they actively evaluating their own compliance status? You want to see the minutes of their management reviews.
To see if the executives even care.
Exactly. Is the executive team actually discussing their compliance performance, or is it just a stagnant spreadsheet managed by some junior compliance officer in a basement office?
Right. Is it a living, breathing process? It's really about finding the organizational reflex. If they get hit with a new law, how does the corporate nervous system react?
Precisely.
But, compliance is just the baseline.
It's the floor.
Yeah, it's the bare minimum required to just stay out of jail.
Yeah.
A truly effective management system has to serve the broader strategy of the business.
Which naturally leads us into Section 8.8, auditing context.
Okay, this one. I always hear auditors complain about this section. It's historically one of the most difficult things to execute effectively.
Because it feels so abstract.
Exactly. Context.
Yeah.
It encompasses the internal and external issues relevant to their purpose and the needs of interested parties.
It sounds like consultant speak.
It does.
Yeah.
How do you objectively audit a corporate vibe or a business strategy? Like if I'm auditing an automotive manufacturer and they're pivoting entirely to electric vehicles, and I personally think their strategy is terrible and their market research is completely flawed, I can't just write a nonconformity that says, hey, your business plan is bad. I'm not a McKinsey consultant. I'm an auditor.
And you absolutely must maintain that boundary. You are not auditing the quality of their strategic vision. You are auditing the competence of the process they use to arrive at that vision.
Okay, so separating the outcome from the process again.
Exactly. You need objective evidence that they utilized suitable strategic analysis and planning techniques.
What does that look like in practice, though? Give me an example.
You ask for the inputs. Show me the PESTLE analysis, political, economic, social, technological, legal, environmental.
Right, classic frameworks.
Show me the SWOT analysis. And more importantly, who was in the room when this was developed?
Who was steering the ship?
Right. If an organization claims their context includes an aggressive expansion into a highly volatile geopolitical region, but their risk analysis was conducted entirely by an internal marketing team with zero geopolitical expertise, well, the process is flawed.
The people were not competent for the task.
Exactly. The competence of the individuals determining the context is auditable evidence.
So you're basically looking for cognitive diversity and empirical backing in their strategic planning? Like, are they just existing in an echo chamber, drinking their own Kool-Aid, or are they actually gathering data from interested parties?
Are they serving their suppliers,
Yeah.
their local community, the
Right.
regulatory bodies?
Right. And critically, how often are they reviewing this context? Because, I mean, a context document from 2019 is entirely useless in the post-pandemic current macroeconomic environment.
Oh, it's a dinosaur. If their management system is anchored to a reality that simply no longer exists, the entire system is structurally compromised.
Structurally compromised. Wow. But a flawless strategy and a perfect compliance radar are completely meaningless if the people steering the ship just don't care.
The human element.
Yeah. The human element is where systems either thrive or they completely collapse, which takes us deep into the executive suite with Section A.9, Auditing Leadership and Commitment.
Right. Most management system standards explicitly require top management to demonstrate leadership and commitment, and they have very specific accountabilities that they simply cannot delegate.
They can't just pass the buck to HR.
No, they can delegate the drafting of a policy, sure, but they cannot delegate the ultimate accountability for the effectiveness of the management system itself.
Okay, but let's talk about the reality of auditing the C-suite.
It's intimidating.
It is. As an auditor, you eventually have to sit across a very large, expensive table from a CEO or a board of directors.
Yeah.
And these individuals are brilliant, they're intimidating, and let's be honest, they are usually highly media trained.
Oh, extremely polished.
Right. If you ask a CEO, are you committed to environmental sustainability?
Right.
They are going to give you a flawless, PR-approved 10-minute monologue about their deep personal love for the planet.
Complete with hand gestures.
Exactly. So how do you piece that corporate veil? How do you find objective evidence of actual leadership and not just a rehearsed speech?
You bypass the rhetoric entirely, and you look at the resource allocation. Words are incredibly cheap. Budgets are undeniable.
Oh, I love that.
If the CEO claims safety is their ultimate priority, you look at the capital expenditure requests. How many safety improvement projects were denied funding last quarter in favor of production-enhancing projects?
That's where the truth is.
You look at their calendar. How much time are they actually spending in management reviews focused on the system versus simply receiving a one-page executive summary once a year?
It reminds me of that phrase, don't tell me what you value, show me your budget, and I'll tell you what you value.
That is the auditor's mantra for leadership right there.
Yeah.
The standard also requires you to verify that they understand discipline-specific issues.
What do you mean by discipline-specific?
Well, if you are interviewing the CEO of a chemical processing company regarding an occupational health and safety system, they should not just be talking about high-level corporate synergy and teamwork. They need to demonstrate an adequate, working understanding of the specific catastrophic hazards inherent to their operation.
They need to know what happens if valve number 4 failed.
Exactly. They don't need to be engineers, but they need to understand the risk profile.
And we can't let the focus remain entirely at the top, right? The 2026 text specifically reminds us that leadership happens at every tier of the organization.
Middle management is critical.
Because a visionary CEO is effectively neutralized. If the middle managers are incentivized to ignore the management system just to hit their production quotas.
Which is exactly why you audit the alignment of objectives. Does the performance bonus structure for a floor manager directly conflict with the quality objectives set by top management?
Oh, that happens all the time.
Right. If a manager is actively penalized for stopping the line to address a quality issue, then the leadership's stated commitment to quality is just a complete facade.
Yeah, it's totally broken at the operational level. And this friction between objectives and reality inevitably breeds risk.
It does.
Which brings us to Section A10, Auditing Risks and Opportunities. Now, one of the most common mistakes I see out there is treating risk as a discrete, standalone item on a checklist.
Yes. The Tuesday at 2 p.m. we will audit risk mentality. It drives me crazy.
Right, like it's a meeting you can just schedule and be done with.
Risk determination is not an event. It is the atmospheric pressure of the entire management system. It has to be woven into every single interview and every single document review you do.
The standard gives us 3 core objectives here. Give assurance on the credibility of the risk identification process, assure the risks are correctly determined and managed, and review how the organization addresses them.
Right.
I want to zero in on the first one, the credibility of the identification process. How do we know they aren't just identifying the easy, manageable risks and totally ignoring the existential ones?
Well, you cross-reference their risk register with the context analysis we discussed earlier.
tying it back to the pestle.
Exactly. If their context identified a massive vulnerability in a specific raw material due to, say, a trade war, but that vulnerability doesn't appear anywhere on their risk register,
Then their identification process is a sham.
it lacks all credibility, yes.
You evaluate their methodology. Are they using qualitative risk matrices? The old green, yellow, red charts.
Yes. And if so, are they suffering from the classic flaw of those matrices where high probability but low impact events are improperly weighted against low probability but high impact catastrophic events?
Right, where a paper cut that happens every day is somehow rated as a higher risk than a reactor meltdown that might happen once a century.
Exactly. You are auditing the architecture of their paranoia. How do they actually decide what level of risk is acceptable? Because a business that accepts zero risk is a business that doesn't exist.
True. So you look for defined thresholds.
Yes. Who has the authority to accept a high risk? Is it documented? And don't forget the flip side of this equation, opportunities.
Right, it's risks and opportunities.
A system purely focused on risk avoidance is stagnant. The auditor must also look for evidence that the organization is systematically identifying opportunities for improvement, efficiency gains, or strategic pivots.
Okay, so we've looked at the math, the compliance, the strategy, the leadership, and the risk matrix. We have a solid grasp of the organization itself.
Inside the walls, yes.
But earlier we talked about that target data breach. We talked about the danger of stopping at the edge of the corporate org chart.
The HVAC vendor.
Exactly. The 2026 standard aggressively expands the lens. We need to talk about scope. Specifically, Section 811, the life cycle perspective, and Section 812, the audit of supply chain.
Huge additions. Let's unpack the life cycle perspective first. 8.11 requires auditors to evaluate how an organization exercises control and influence over its products and services from the very acquisition of raw materials through design, production, delivery, use, and finally, end-of-life treatment.
Okay, I want to aggressively push back on this for a second, playing the role of a frustrated auditee.
Please do.
Because not every company is a massive multinational chemical manufacturer. If I am auditing a small, localized software as a service company, forcing a full cradle-to-grave life cycle approach feels like intense regulatory overreach.
I hear this complaint daily.
Right, because they don't mine raw materials, and their software doesn't end up in a physical landfill. So how does the standard account for them?
The standard uses a very specific word, and people gloss over it. It is a life cycle perspective.
Perspective, not a mandate.
Right. It is not a mandate to adopt a rigid manufacturing-centric life cycle methodology. It requires the auditor to use professional judgment based on the organization's unique context.
Okay, so how does that apply to the sauce company?
For a software company, the raw materials might be the open source code libraries they incorporate into their build.
Oh, that makes sense.
And the end of life might be their data destruction protocols when a client leaves and how they decommission their cloud servers.
So it's translating the physical concept into digital reality.
Exactly. The point is to break the myopia of only caring about the product while it is physically or virtually inside your own building.
You're forcing them to take responsibility for the upstream and downstream ripples of their existence.
That's a great way to phrase it.
Which connects beautifully to the increasing pressure of Scope 3 emissions reporting and circular economy regulations that are popping up everywhere.
Oh, absolutely. Even if the standard only demands a perspective, global legislation is increasingly demanding hard quantitative data on the entire life cycle.
It's all converging. And this expands geometrically when you look at Section 812, the audit of supply chain. This deals heavily with second-party audits.
Right. When an organization audits its own suppliers or hires an auditing firm to do it on their behalf.
Why are we seeing such a massive explosion in second-party audits recently? It seems like an incredibly expensive undertaking.
Because the liability has shifted. You can no longer offshore your risk. It used to be, oh, the supplier messed up, not us. That doesn't work anymore.
The public doesn't care.
Exactly. Organizations conduct these audits to quantify risks before signing massive contracts, to verify that critical processes are operating correctly, or, increasingly, to verify ethical production and environmental standards deep in the supply chain.
Because if a Tier 3 supplier uses forced labor or dumps toxic waste in a river, the public and the regulators do not blame the unknown Tier 3 supplier.
No, they blame the brand whose logo is on the final box, the one on the retail shelf.
But the logistics of this are terrifying to think about. If I'm auditing a global automaker's supply chain management system, I'm looking at thousands of suppliers across dozens of countries.
It's a logistical nightmare.
The standard specifically warns that fully auditing a supply chain requires activities at multiple locations and involves multiple distinct organizations. How does an audit team maintain continuity, let alone sanity, across a scope that massive?
It requires draconian organization and flawlessly prepared mechanics. You cannot manage a decentralized multi-organization audit with ad hoc checklists and loose email threads.
Just a bunch of sticky notes.
It will collapse in a day. You need airtight infrastructure. Which segues perfectly into the actual mechanics of the audit, defined in sections A13 and A14.
Right, let's get into the mechanics. Section A13 is all about preparing audit working documents. I always tell practitioners that this is exactly like a Michelin-starred chef prepping their mise en place before the dinner rush.
I love that analogy, yes.
You do not chop onions while the steak is burning. You prepare every single tool beforehand. But the 2026 standard demands more than just, writing down a list of generic questions.
It demands profound intentionality for every single piece of paper or digital form you introduce into the process. The audit team must ask, which specific audit record will this document create?
Okay.
Which audit activity is it directly linked to? Who is the ultimate user of this document? And what information is actually needed to prepare it?
It sounds like it's designed to finally kill the legacy checklist.
That is the goal.
We've all seen them, right? Those 40-page generic checklists that have been passed down in an auditing firm for a decade, just full of questions that don't even apply to the current context.
Legacy checklists are the absolute enemy of an effective audit. And the standard explicitly highlights efficiency here, particularly for combined or integrated audits.
What's that look like?
Well, if you are evaluating an organization against an environmental standard, a quality standard, and an information security standard simultaneously.
A triple threat.
Right. You must cluster similar requirements. Do not send 3 different auditors to ask the HR director the exact same questions about employee training records on 3 different days.
The auditee would lose their mind.
They'd throw you out. You coordinate the working documents to minimize the footprint and the friction of the audit.
You build a highly efficient gathering mechanism.
Yeah.
But what are we actually gathering? Like, where are we drawing the data from? Section APOT 14 provides a masterclass on selecting sources of information.
It really does.
And I was struck by how far this has evolved beyond just look at the policy binder and talk to a floor manager.
The arsenal of information sources today is vast. You still have your foundational sources, of course. Interviews, direct observation of the physical environment, documented policies, licenses, contracts.
The classics.
Right. And you have records like inspection reports and management meeting minutes. But then you get into the analytics, data summaries, live performance indicators, massive databases.
The one that really caught my eye in the 2026 text, and this is wild, was the explicit inclusion of simulations and modeling.
Yes. Digital twins.
Right. We were talking about digital twins. An organization might have a fully functional digital replica of their entire global supply chain or their manufacturing floor that literally runs predictive scenarios.
It's incredible technology.
But as an auditor, how do you even approach that as a source of information? How do you validate a simulation? You can't just look at a screen and say, looks good.
No, and that is the bleeding edge of modern auditing. You don't just look at the output of the simulation. You have to audit the inputs and the algorithms themselves.
Wow.
What data is feeding the digital twin? Is it a live API pulling from physical sensors on the floor? Or is it manually entered data that could be easily manipulated by a manager trying to make their numbers look better?
Garbage in, garbage out.
Exactly. How often is the model calibrated against physical reality? Because if the simulation says the supply chain is resilient, but the underlying data is a month old?
Then the simulation is a massive liability, not an asset.
Precisely. It gives a false sense of security.
That requires an entirely different technical skill set from the auditor. I mean, you aren't just reading text anymore. You are interrogating data architecture.
It's a whole new world.
But to get access to that architecture, to get the interviews, to actually see the physical environment, you eventually have to execute the audit. You have to step into their world.
The execution phase.
Right, which brings us to sections A.15 and A.16, on-site versus remote auditing.
Let's start with AK-15, visiting the auditee's location. The underlying tension here is always the balance between thoroughness and interference. You are there to gather critical evidence, yes, but you absolutely cannot disrupt their operational processes.
And there's also the Hawthorne effect to consider. Right?
No, always.
The moment an auditor walks onto a factory floor in a crisp, high-vis vest, people change their behavior. They slow down, they follow procedures, They usually skip, they hide the duct tape fixes.
The auditor is here, scramble.
Exactly. How do you plan an on-site visit to get past that performance?
It starts with meticulous, quiet planning. You secure access permissions in advance. You understand the shift schedule so you aren't arriving during a chaotic shift change.
Right.
But more importantly, you manage your own health, safety, and security protocols flawlessly. You review the required PPE, the quarantine periods, the vaccination requirements if necessary.
Because if you mess that up,
The fastest way to lose all credibility with an auditee is to violate their safety rules while you are literally there to audit their safety system. It's embarrassing.
do as I say, not as I do. Yeah, that doesn't fly. There are also massive security implications regarding technology now.
Huge.
I can't just walk into a semiconductor clean room or a pharmaceutical R&D lab with my smartphone and start taking pictures of the layout.
Absolutely not. You must explicitly confirm the arrangements regarding mobile devices, cameras, and recording equipment well beforehand. You are dealing with intense confidentiality and trade secrets in those spaces.
And during the conduct of the audit itself, there is one absolute non-negotiable rule.
Say it.
Never touch the equipment.
Never touch the equipment ever. Even if you spent 20 years operating that exact model of CNC machine before you became an auditor.
Even if you know exactly how to fix it.
Yes. Even if you see an operator doing something slightly inefficient, unless you are explicitly permitted and it is a formal part of the audit scope, you keep your hands firmly in your pockets.
Because of liability.
Exactly. If you touch a console and that machine crashes 5 minutes later, you have introduced liability and you have entirely compromised the independence of your audit. You are now part of the problem.
Man. You also have to ask permission before taking copies of documents containing personal information, right?
GDPR and privacy laws.
Yes. It's all about respecting the boundaries of the physical space. But what happens when there is no physical space? What happens when the auditee is a fully remote organization or, global events prevent travel entirely?
Like a pandemic.
Exactly. Section 8.16, using remote auditing methods, addresses this. And what's interesting is it's no longer treated as a backup plan. It is a primary methodology now.
It is. But it comes with profound challenges that people underestimate. The standard emphasizes that remote auditing requires joint responsibility between the auditee and the auditor.
It's partnership.
Yes, to ensure the infrastructure can actually support the objectives. You need good internet, good software, quiet spaces.
The most obvious casualty of remote auditing to me is nonverbal communication.
The loss of the room.
Exactly. In a physical room, if I ask a procurement manager a tough question about vendor selection, I can see if they suddenly tense up. I can see if they keep glancing nervously at their director who's sitting in the corner. I can read the room.
You pick up on the micro expressions.
Right. But on a screen, especially with 30 people tiled on a gallery view, all of that context is completely annihilated. How does the standard advise practitioners to compensate for that loss?
You compensate with precision and confirmation. Because you lose the microexpressions, your line of questioning must be significantly sharper. You focus relentlessly on objective evidence.
Give me an example.
Instead of asking, can you explain how this process works? You say, don't tell me how the process works. Please share your screen and show me the live database.
Cut through the talk. Go to the data.
Exactly. Furthermore, to counter issues like lagging connections or the classic screen buffering excuse people use when they need time to think.
Oh, the strategic freeze.
Yes. To counter that, you must summarize and review the interview results live with the individual.
Oh, like a readback.
Yes. You say, just to ensure I capture this correctly over our connection, you are stating that X happens when Y is triggered. Is that accurate?
You build redundant confirmation loops into the conversation, so they can't backtrack later and say, oh, the audio cut out, I didn't say that.
Exactly. It protects both of you. And you should always acknowledge the format. Remote audits are often way more exhausting for the auditee due to screen fatigue.
Zoom fatigue is real.
So thanking them for their cooperation in navigating the digital friction, it's not just polite, it actually builds the rapport necessary to keep the information flowing.
That makes total sense. Okay, so the execution is complete. You have gathered the data via sophisticated statistical sampling. You've evaluated the strategic context, tested the leadership, traced the supply chain, and navigated both physical and remote environments.
You have a mountain of evidence.
The evidence pool is massive. Now comes the most difficult intellectual labor of the entire process: synthesizing that data into official findings.
The moment of truth.
We are moving into our final segment, Section A.18, Determining and Recording Findings. Let's start with A.18.1.
So A18.1 outlines the factors you absolutely must consider when determining audit findings. You don't just look at the raw evidence in isolation.
You don't just look at the puddle on the floor.
Right. You evaluate it against the broader context. You look at follow-up from previous records like, did they actually implement the corrective actions they promised last year?
Are they repeating mistakes?
Yes. And you also consider the specific requirements of your audit client.
You also have to evaluate the integrity of your own process at this stage, don't you?
Self-reflection. Yes.
Like, did you actually realize the planned activities? Did your sample size hold up under scrutiny? Or was the data pool somehow corrupted during the extraction?
You have to be sure your foundation is solid before you start pointing fingers. And it is vital to remember that findings are not exclusively negative.
That's a good point.
An audit is an evaluation, not an inquisition. Findings can highlight areas where the organization is actively exceeding normal practice, and they can identify opportunities for improvement that don't actually rise to the level of a violation.
But inevitably, you do have to write the report card.
You do.
Sections A.18.2 and 8.18.3 deal with recording conformities and nonconformities. Now, writing a conformity is fairly straightforward, right?
Usually, yes.
You describe the specific criteria met, provide the supporting evidence, and make the declaration. Gold star. But writing a nonconformity, that is an art form.
Oh, it really is. Because a poorly written nonconformity will be immediately rejected or endlessly debated by an angry auditee.
We didn't fail. Your wording is vague.
Exactly. A perfect nonconformity report leaves absolutely no room for debate. You describe the exact criteria, the specific clause of the standard, or their specific internal procedure.
You quote chapter and verse.
Yes. You provide the undeniable objective audit evidence, and then, crucially, you must provide a clear description explaining why the criteria are not fulfilled.
You bridge the gap for them.
You connect the evidence directly to the failure. And if your auditing firm uses a grading system like minor, major, critical, you apply that grade based on the systemic risk of the failure.
Okay, let me throw a really complex scenario at you, covered in A.18.4, dealing with multiple criteria.
I love these. Go ahead.
Let's say I'm conducting an integrated audit. I'm walking the warehouse floor, and I discover a massive uncontained chemical spill that hasn't been reported.
Not good.
Right. This single event is a cascading failure. It violates their environmental management system, obviously.
Yes.
It violates their occupational health and safety system because people are walking near it. And because the chemical splashed and ruined finished goods, it also violates their quality management system.
A triple failure from one event.
Exactly. How does the standard want me to document that? Do I write 3 separate, distinct nonconformities for one puddle of chemicals?
The standard actually provides 2 valid approaches here, and your choice depends heavily on your reporting software and the client's specific preference.
Okay, what's approach 1?
Approach 1 is exactly what you just described. You raise separate individual audit findings for each criterion. One strictly for environmental, one for safety, one for quality.
Which is incredibly thorough, but I mean, I can see an auditee getting furious that they were getting dinged 3 separate times for one mistake.
Yeah.
It makes the root cause analysis incredibly repetitive for them, right?
Exactly. They have to fill out 3 separate CompTIA forms for the same puddle, which is why approach 2 is often highly preferred for integrated audits.
How does that work?
You raise a single unified audit finding, but within that finding, you explicitly reference the multiple criteria that were violated.
Oh, I see.
You say, this single event demonstrates a failure in environmental control, Clause X, safety protocol, Clause Y, and quality preservation, Clause Z.
So it's all grouped together.
Yes. This forces the organization to conduct a holistic root cause analysis rather than arbitrarily treating the environmental failure as somehow separate from the safety failure.
Because usually, the root cause is a singular failure in leadership or training that caused all 3.
Right. Exactly. The puddle is just the symptom. The disease is a lack of training.
And as the auditor, you can subtly guide the auditee on how to respond to these multi-criteria findings, ensuring they actually address the systemic root rather than just, mopping up the spill and calling it a day.
It is the ultimate goal of the entire process. You are diagnosing the systemic health of the organization.
We have covered immense ground today. I mean, we have taken the raw text of BSE and ISO 19011.2026 Annex A and really mapped it onto the chaotic reality of modern business.
It's a lot to process.
We've looked at the math of automated sampling, the abstraction of corporate strategy, the logistics of global supply chains, and the psychology of delivering a flawless finding.
The full life cycle of the audit.
Exactly. For those of you in the field executing this standard, the level of rigor required is monumental. You are the vanguard ensuring that the hidden systems running our global infrastructure are actually sound.
It requires a rare combination of mathematical precision, strategic understanding, and profound human intuition.
Which brings me to a final, somewhat provocative thought to leave you with today.
Oh, here we go.
While we focused heavily on Annex A today, there's a small, incredibly potent detail buried earlier in the standard, under auditor competence requirements in Section 7.2.3.2.
Yes. It is the detail that truly anchors this standard in the year 2026.
The standard now explicitly requires auditors to understand the appropriateness and the consequences of using artificial intelligence-based evaluation tools.
The AI clause.
Think about the trajectory of everything we just discussed. If AI tools become the standard for crunching those massive variable-based telemetry samples,
Which they will.
if AI is validating the digital twins, if AI is automatically scraping code repositories and instantaneously flagging compliance gaps, what is the future role of the human auditor?
It completely forces a redefinition of the entire profession.
If the machine can do the math flawlessly and read 1 million pages of supply chain contracts in a second, the ultimate audit skill of the future is no longer data gathering.
No.
It is context. Will the human auditor simply become the ultimate arbiter of reality? Like the only entity capable of walking into a boardroom and knowing when the AI's definition of leadership or strategic intent is fundamentally philosophically wrong.
The human is the final backstop.
Are we transitioning from data gatherers to algorithm interrogators?
Yeah.
It is a massive paradigm shift
Yeah.
that every professional in this field will have to confront very soon. Something for you to evaluate on your own. Until next time.